Hi guys, good afternoon. My name is Trevino, and today I will be doing my presentation on Carlos Trevino. So I'll start off saying a little bit about my contents. First, I'll start out with capital crime. I'll talk about the details, some of the background, juvenile life, the adult life, controversy and debates for Mr. Trevino, the sentence, the trial, and the current process. So let's jump right in. So, to begin with, what is capital crime or capital punishment? So, it's pretty much when a person is put to death by the state as a punishment that they committed. Let's just say, for example, burglary, rape, assault. Those type of charges can be punishable by death. It's usually a person who has been sentenced to death and is awaiting execution. They're commonly known as condemned, and they're said to be on death row. So if you've ever heard that phrase, that's where it comes from. And they are usually crimes that are punishable by death, and if they're not punishable by death, they can either go to a different route, which is life without parole. But in some states, like Texas, they carry out the most executions per year. So, start out talking about some of the details of Mr. Trevino. So, he was originally scheduled to be executed at 6 p.m. local time on Wednesday, September 30th, 2020 at the Walls unit at Huntsville State Penitentiary in Huntsville, Texas. So Trevino was first charged with murdering a 15-year-old little girl by the name of Linda Salinas, and because of that incident, he was sentenced to the maximum punishment in Texas, which is the death penalty. He was scheduled to die by lethal injection, and his execution date since then has been withdrawn, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So a little bit about the background. So Mr. Trevino is 45 years old. He was, at the time, he was single, not affiliated with any type of personal family members. He spent the last 21 years on death row in Texas, and he was born in Texas. Throughout Mr. Trevino's juvenile life, he was very disturbed, and the reason I say that is because he suffered a lot of trauma with his mother. Trevino's mom was very abusive towards him. The mother relied very much on alcohol as well as drugs. Some of the allegations that Mr. Trevino says is that his mother physically and emotionally abused him when he was younger. He received numerous head injuries because of that, and he says that they never went treated, so they went untreated. And because of that, he later claims that was the reason why he committed those crimes, was because he wasn't thinking right. Carlos did not attend school regularly. He did poor in school. By ninth grade, he he said, you know what, school is not for me. He dropped out, and from there he just started his life as living in the streets, working odd jobs such as construction. He worked a little bit in plumbing, but he did not hold jobs very well. So now we're going to get into the adult life of Mr. Carlos Trevino. So like I said, he worked in construction prior to his arrest. He was also one of the members of the Pistoleros street gang, which was a gang that started in probably like the early 1900s, and he was a proud member. He was always on the streets trying to get in trouble, trying to mess around with women, which landed him in some big issues. He had previously been arrested for unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, which him and some of his buddies actually got that charge because he was trying to essentially commit grand theft auto. He was under mandatory supervision at the time of his arrest, and Mr. Trevino also, because of all his record, he had very low economic status. He didn't have much money. He relied on family members, on friends for rides. He lived a very solemnly lonely life. So some of the crimes committed. So this is pretty much the crime that happened, and it pretty much started like this. So it was one night, Mr. Trevino was at a party. He was accompanied by a group of individuals, which were mostly males. And at that party, Mr. Trevino gathered 4 other individuals, which are Carlos Trevino, Santos Cervantes, Brian Apolinar, Cienido Rey, also known as Sam, Juan Gonzalez, which was actually Mr. Trevino's cousin, and they were together on the evening of June 9th, 1996. Like I said, they left the party. Mr. Trevino wanted to get some beer. That was the excuse. He wanted to get some beer, and they actually told and persuaded one of the females at the party, known as Miss Linda Salinas. They told her, hey, come with us, help us get some beer, we'll throw one in for you. And being so young and vulnerable, Miss Salinas agreed. Shortly after that, they ended up getting some chips, some drinks, and they went to a nearby park known as Espada Park. From there, Miss Linda was brutally attacked, raped, molested. Not only that, but Cervantes, Apolinar, and Ray were the ones holding her down, while Mr. Trevino continuously raped her. After that, Mr. Trevino also insinuated that the partners should engage in raping Miss Salinas as well. So that was one of the charges he got as well. One of the key elements was that the only person that stayed back in the vehicle was Mr. Trevino's cousin, known as Juan Gonzalez. At that time, he was a minor, so that's why they told him to stay back. And then Miss Linda struggled to escape during the rape, but miserably failed. So some of the controversies and debates over what happened was that Gonzalez, who ultimately testified in court, said that he had nothing to do with it, that he didn't know what they were doing. He testified that the group wanted no affiliation with police, law enforcement whatsoever. So they actually tried to cover that story up and try to get alibis per se. The cousin actually overheard Mr. Trevino talking about, more so bragging about his previous life in jail, saying that he snapped Miss Linda's neck while trying to shut her up. There was also some comments made about a specific, I would say about 6-inch knife that was used during the brutal attack as well. And Mr. Trevino was bragging about that, ultimately saying, yeah, you know, I might have stabbed her, and that's something I learned back in my inmates days. So he was bragging about that. Mr. Trevino also warned the others not to say anything, or else there would be serious ramifications and consequences against them. Ultimately, and unfortunately, Miss Linda's body was found at the park. She was not alive. She was completely cold, dead. The autopsy revealed that she had been stabbed, 2 stab wounds in her neck towards the left side, which were, they came to find out it was the knife that Trevino bragged about. So overall, it was a very, very gruesome, somewhat planned, disgusting crime committed by Mr. Trevino. But now we're getting into the sentence. So Trevino was ultimately sentenced to capital murder in the state of Texas. He was sentenced to death in August of 1997, convicted of capital murder, where he would spend the rest of his life for taking away the life of a 15-year-old little girl who actually was very excited about starting high school freshman year. And she was very smart. I mean, she was academic-wise, she was almost 3.7 GPA. That's what the family members said. She had a lot going on, but she did like going to the family parties and being involved with that atmosphere. But ultimately that night was not the best night for her, because now she's not here. So some of the participants, Santos Cervantes was convicted of capital murder, sentenced to life in prison. The other people, Cienito Rey, convicted of convicted of murder and given 50-year sentence. Brian Apolinar, convicted of aggravated sexual assault. His term was only 25 years in prison. And Juan Gonzalez, who was a juvenile at the time, he didn't get any charges pressed against him because of his age. So he was released, but law enforcement did take his statements in writing, which was later used against Mr. Trevino. So now we're getting into the trial process. So from the information that I got, the trial was very lengthy because of the details and the circumstances. One of the key elements that they brought up in the trial was that Trevino's appeal attorney failed to actually produce some mitigating evidence that could have showed ineffective counsel towards Trevino, which that's when the new attorneys came in and they said, hey, Trevino was represented by a previous attorney. He failed to represent Trevino in a proper way. So now we want a new trial with the new participants, and did not present all the proper mitigating evidence, which resulted in an unfair sentence of death. That was what Trevino's attorney was ultimately trying to persuade the judge to look over. This was petitioned both by the Board of Pardons and Paroles and Texas Governor Greg Abbott. And some of the concerns and the issues that was going on at that time was that Trevino was sentenced in the state of Texas, and being known that Texas is the #1 state that goes through with executing capital murders in every year. So they said, hey, you know what, we're gonna take all this evidence, ineffective counsel, and we're gonna prove that Mr. Trevino suffered from an abusive mother. She drank while Trevino was in her womb, and that caused fatal alcohol syndrome, which they also tried to throw that in with the judge. And his father was not around as well. The father left at an early age, and so all those elements brought together was the reason they were trying to prove that Mr. Trevino snapped. So the current process. This was not Carlos Trevino's first execution date. It's been always pushed back for some reason. Like I said, rescheduling, paperwork delays, errors. There was one execution that was scheduled for June 30th, but it was rescheduled due to the current pandemic situation that was going on. Later in September 30th, 2020, the order was again withdrawn by Judge Jennifer Peña of the 290th Judicial District Court in Berkshire County, Texas, and this was due to the coronavirus as well. They did petition for a writ of certiorari to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, and this was due to all the new evidence that they supposedly came up with. But from what I researched, Mr. Trevino is still behind bars. He is trying to prove his case that he is, in a way innocent, that his mental capacities were not there that night. But from what I read was that um, they weren't believing that, you know, that Mr. Trevino was fully conscious of what he was doing, that he took the life of a young, a beautiful 15-year-old little girl who was just starting her life, you know, and this individual with an extensive record in the past comes in with four other individuals, and they trick her into lies, trickery, and lure her like a, you know, like a little dog, you know, into the park, and just abuse her, rape her, and just stab her in the neck, like an animal. And that is why Mr. Carlos Trevino is behind bars, was sentenced to capital murder, and this is my works cited. And at this time, that is pretty much it for my presentation. Hope you guys liked it. Thank you.